his statement, and I give the floor now to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. President. We welcome the participation in this meeting of the High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Ms. Federica Mogherini, and would like to thank her for the briefing on the cooperation between the UN and one of the largest regional organizations. Very recently, on the 7th of March, we discussed the cooperation between the UN and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. And there, all Security Council members, without exception, advocated for the development and improvement of cooperation between the UN and regional and sub-regional organizations on the basis of Chapter 8 of the Charter. This applies equally to the European Union, to the African Union, Eurasian Economic Union, CSTO, SCO, and all other regional organizations, and this is because the world today compels us to solve problems together on the basis of the comparative advantage of each intergovernmental body. Any of the above-mentioned regional organizations warrants respect and can contribute towards strengthening international stability and cooperation. We also note and share the constant intent by the European Union to strengthen global multilateralism with the leading role played by the United Nations. And in this, of course, our interests fully coincide. At the same time, we are concerned by the dangerous trend which is becoming increasingly obvious recently, namely the attempt to replace the system of international law with something new called the rules-based order. And this is something that we keep hearing constantly in the recent times by the representative of the European Union. These rules are invented in order to fit the specific needs of the like-minded people. And those who want to go by those rules are called the supporters of unilateralism. Those who don't are called the opponents of multilateralism. There's no doubt that the European Union is an important political and economic player internationally, and it brings in a very important, sometimes decisive contribution to resolving many international issues. And the European Union is more than significantly represented on the Security Council. To date, 1/3 of the Security Council members and that's 5 countries, is a European Union country. 2 of them have the veto right. Despite differences of opinion that continue between Russia and the EU, our cooperation in many areas does continue. And we see a large potential here, first and foremost, when it comes to such global challenges as terrorism, religious extremism, drugs trafficking, transborder crime, and illegal migration. Russia and the EU have garnered considerable experience of close and fruitful cooperation also in the Middle East settlement within the framework of the Quartet of International Mediators. In 2016, for example, we jointly prepared a report which contains very clear recommendations on how to resume the political process, and this continues being valid. We also value and assess positively the role played by the European Union in trying to attain an agreement on the issue of the Iran nuclear program, and we worked on that as well. And we are hoping for the constructive contribution of the EU international efforts to move forward the political settlement in Syria. What's important here is to give up on trying to politicize the issue of humanitarian assistance to the Syrian Arab Republic. A considerable role played by the EU in helping the peacekeeping and peace-building efforts by the UN, including in Africa, is obvious, and you can count on our support here. A considerable contribution is also brought in to help international cooperation and implementation of the Agenda 2030. But in the recent years, we have seen a whole number of questions as to what extent the European Union can play a constructive role in the European continent and in the world. We are left with the impression that this impressive and economically powerful entity cannot define its own independent political line. Increasingly frequently, what we see in the cornerstone are the interests of Euro-Atlantic solidarity and bloc mentality. And what this leads to is something that we saw on the example of Libya, Syria, Ukraine, and Venezuela today, and a number of other states. Frequently, the proposed models for settling domestic issues in those countries simply do not work. Let's not burn bridges here. Otherwise, there will be no need for mediation. One of the recent examples is the stagnating dialogue between Belgrade and Pristina and the incapacity to convince the Kosovo Albanian authorities to give up on their provocational policies. Unfortunately, in the world today, the restrictive and measures and sanctions have become almost a key instrument of foreign policy, and the European Union is guilty of that as well. The effect of such unilateral steps is something that's very questionable. It further weakens those development stands with the international community should instead help. We note that our European partners have very obediently swallowed the American unreliable version about the alleged violations by Russia of one of the foundational treaties for the European continent, the INF Treaty, which we have tried to save until the very last moment. As a result, in front of our eyes, what we're witnessing is a collapse of one of the pillars of European security. And the same bloc solidarity is the reason why European is marching in lockstep with even the most absurd accusations against Russia, and reiterating them in the West is something that became almost a matter of proper political decorum. Despite all of this, we remain optimistic. We believe that all of the issues of today will be overcome, and we once again will be talking about strategic partners that our joint neighbors are interested in, African, Latin American, and Asian states. We continue being hopeful that through joint efforts, we will be able to heal the rifts that existed between Europe and Euro-Atlantic space and avoid new rifts. We are interested in a European Union which is not fragmented and weak, something that people are trying to misrepresent. We're interested in an independent and strong one. The European Union, which has an important role to play internationally and has a vision of the common future for Europe from a free Atlantic to Vladivostok. Thank you.
Je remercie le représentant de
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for